Thank you. Mr. Prince, thank you for being here today on that. We've been discussing a little bit here about the goal of this particular venture here, and I think that General Petraeus has been pretty clear that he'd like to change it from the type of war it's been to one where he wants to defeat insurgents, and that entails in significant part winning the hearts and minds. So I want to read you this quote. Counterinsurgents that use excessive force to limit short-term risk alienate the local populace. They deprive themselves of the support or tolerance of the people. This situation is what insurgents want. It increases the threat they pose. Do you know who made that statement?
Do I know who made that statement?
Yes.
No, sir.
That was General Petraeus. You know, he's the one that wrote the official counterinsurgency manual. It does appear from some of the evidence here, though, that Blackwater and other companies sometimes at least conduct their missions in ways that lead exactly in the opposite direction that General Petraeus wants to go. That doesn't mean you're not fulfilling your contractual obligations. In a recent report, there was a quote on Ann Exline Starr, who was a former Coalition Provisional Authority advisor. It talks about the fact that the private mission is different from the overall public operation. Those, for example, doing escort duty are going to be judged by their bosses solely on whether they get their client from point A to point B, not whether they win Iraqi hearts and minds along the way. And she goes on to talk about the fact that soldiers, when they escorted her, because they are able to escort people and train for that, oftentimes also interacted with the Iraqi community and did things to ingratiate themselves to the Iraqis. The contractors, by contrast, focused only on the contract. She said what they told her was, our mission is to protect the principal at all costs. If that means pissing off the Iraqis, too bad. Her language, not mine. Another counterinsurgency expert is Army Colonel Peter Mansour. Earlier this year, he made a statement about private military contractors, and he said, if they push traffic off the roads or if they shoot up a car that looks suspicious, they may be operating within their contract, but it is to the detriment of the mission, which is to bring the people over to our side. So when we look at Blackwater's own records that show that you regularly move traffic off the roads and you shoot up cars, in over 160 incidents on firing on suspicious cars, we can see, I think, why the tactics you use in carrying out your contract might mitigate against what we're trying to do in the insurgency. Retired Army officer, and actually is a conservative analyst now, Ralph Peters, he was more blunt about it. He said, armed contractors do harm COIN, counterinsurgency efforts. Just ask the troops in Iraq. We've had complaints from military leaders over and over again that the way that some contractors operate in Iraq are causing danger and anger against the United States forces. Let me give you one example. For most of 2005, the Army's 3rd Infantry Division was in charge of security in Baghdad. Here's what the Deputy Commander of this division, Brigadier General Carl Horst, said about Blackwater and other private military contractors. These guys run loose in this country and do stupid stuff. There's no authority over them, so you can't come down on them when they escalate force. They shoot people and someone else has to deal with the aftermath. It happens all over the place. Are you familiar with General Horst, sir?
No, sir, I've never met him.
Okay. Well, here's what Colonel Hamas said when he was an officer in Iraq. So the problem is, in protecting the principal, they had to be very aggressive. And each time they went out, they had to offend locals, forcing them to the side of the road, being overpowering and intimidating, at times running vehicles off the road, making enemies each time they went out. So they were actually getting our contract exactly as we asked them to, at the same time hurting our counterinsurgency effort. This goes on again back to Colonel Peter Mansour, who said, I would much rather see basically all armed entities in a counterinsurgency operation fall under the military chain of command. And the CENTCOM Commander, Admiral James Fallon, who we all know now for his current work, his quote is, my instinct is that it's easier and better if they were in uniform and working for me. Can you see and appreciate, Mr. Prince, why there might be some contradiction between what we're asking your organization and others like it to do under the contract as opposed to what we're trying to do as a military force on counterinsurgency?
Sir, I understand the challenges that the military faces there. Like I said before, there's 170-some companies doing business in Iraq. Most of those security contractors are DOD. I think that DOD officers would even complain about their lack of reach over their own DOD, Corps of Engineers, MnSTICI type contractors. Second, we know we're part of the total force in trying to get the mission accomplished. You know, of the 16,000 missions our guys have done, only 195 resulted in any kind of discharge of a weapon. That's less than 1%. So we strive for perfection, but we don't get to choose when the bad guys attack us. You know, the bad guys have figured out, the terrorists have figured out how to make a precision weapon with a car, loaded with explosives, with a suicidal driver.
But just to interrupt you for a second, you're not asserting that every time that you take an affirmative action, it was somebody firing at you first. You do acknowledge that on some occasions, at least, it was a preventative act on your part of your people?
Yes, sir. But this is what happens when our guys are not able to prevent a suicide car bomb. This happened. This blew up 3 Blackwater personnel and 1 State Department security officer up in Mosul. It tossed a 9,000-pound armored Suburban 50 feet into the side of a building, followed by a whole bunch of small arms fire from the rooftops. A very serious ambush, killed 4 Americans that fast.
My question was that you're not disputing the fact that on some occasions when your people might be afraid that something like that is going to happen, that they may fire first, ask questions later.
Sir, like I said, the bad guys have made a precision weapon. The Air Force has a system called a DIRCM, Directional Infrared Countermeasures. It's used to break the lock of an incoming surface-to-air missile. Shines a laser in the seeker head, the missile breaks lock, and it veers away. We have to go through a use-of-force continuum to try to break the lock of this potential deadly suicide weapon. Hand and arm signals, sirens, signs to the back of the vehicles, water bottles, pen flares, shots to the radiator, shots to the windshield before we even go to a lethal force option. So our guys do go through it.
Well,
but they get it right 99.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Waxman, I'd like to just finish up my thought, if I might. I think there's been fairly good
if you could do it in
on the part of the committee here.
Seconds rather than minutes.
Thank you. The point being made is that there are instances that you're not denying that where people shoot first on that. And when you multiply that by the number of times it happens, the number of people and Iraqis that are implicated in those situations, the number of people that they tell, it goes against our counterinsurgency effort, and it goes to the issue of whether or not we ought to have military personnel doing the job, whether this is an inherently government function that we ought to have done on the public side of it, as opposed to having contractors who are, by what we're seeing here today, really don't have much accountability to be exercised over them by either the State Department or the Department of Defense. Yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back the rest of his time, and Chair now recognizes Mr. Duncan.